The night stretched endlessly across the empty Colorado highway, the sky thick with clouds that swallowed the moonlight. A cold wind whispered through the plains, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt. On the shoulder of the road, a sleek silver Mercedes sat still, its engine steaming like a kettle in distress. Inside, Emily Hart leaned against the steering wheel, sighing in frustration. Her phone displayed no signal, the modern equivalent of isolation. The car had sputtered to a stop just 20 minutes after she left the airport. Her driver was unavailable, her assistant unreachable. She cursed softly under her breath, regretting every bit of her independence that had led her here. Alone in the middle of nowhere. From the opposite direction, a rusted blue pickup rolled to a slow halt. Ethan Cole squinted through the windshield, his eyes catching the shimmer of the stranded car's hazard lights. He was on his way home after a 12-hour shift at a small-town auto shop in Aurora, his hands still stained with grease. His worn jacket clung to his shoulders, and the smell of oil never quite left him. But beneath the fatigue sat the quiet instinct of a man who couldn't drive past someone in need. He parked behind the Mercedes, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out into the biting wind. Emily saw him approaching and immediately tensed. The tall man looked rugged, flannel shirt beneath a worn denim jacket, jeans slightly faded, boots scuffed from years of use. His flashlight beam landed on the hood, and he offered a polite nod. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he said, voice calm, steady. Emily hesitated, gripping her phone tighter. "I'm fine," she replied curtly, though her tone lacked conviction. The engine hissed again, steam puffing into the night like an exhale of defeat. Ethan smiled faintly, not offended. "Engines don't fix themselves," he said, kneeling beside the front bumper. "Mind if I take a look?" Her instinct to refuse melted under the fatigue of the night. She watched him pop the hood and inspect the components with practiced care. "You're not some kind of highway scammer, are you?" she muttered, half teasing, half serious. He chuckled, glancing up briefly. "No, ma'am, I'm just a tired mechanic on his way home." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet, you stopped. Wouldn't sleep, right if I didn't," he said simply. The beam of his flashlight flickered across metal, revealing the truth. The car wasn't going anywhere tonight without some work. As Ethan moved around the car, his quiet competence began to show. He removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work like it was second nature. Emily watched, her earlier suspicion fading into quiet curiosity. There was something deliberate in his movements, the steadiness of someone used to fixing broken things. Not just engines, but maybe life itself. "You do this often?" she asked, her voice softening. "Fixing cars," he said, smiling. "Every day. Fixing people's nights. Only occasionally." That made her laugh for the first time that evening, a sound that surprised even her. He examined the engine closely. Fuel lines cracked, he murmured, mostly to himself. "That's why it stalled." He glanced at her. "You're lucky, I keep spares in my truck." Emily blinked. "You carry car parts around." Ethan shrugged modestly. "When you've got an old truck like mine, it's smarter to be prepared." His hands moved with calm precision, tightening, adjusting, making sense of the mess. Emily leaned against the car, watching the faint light flicker across his face. Something about his focus drew her in, like the world could fall apart around him, and he'd still finish what he started. Time moved slower out there. The only sounds were the faint hum of passing wind and the metallic clinks of tools meeting bolts. Emily's designer heels tapped restlessly against the pavement. But gradually, the frustration that had defined her evening began to dissolve. "You said you were heading home," she said after a while. "You got family waiting." Ethan nodded without looking up. "My little girl, Lily, she's 8, probably still awake, pretending she's asleep. I promised I'd read to her when I got home." His voice softened when he said her name, a tenderness Emily wasn't used to hearing in men who worked with their hands. For a moment, guilt flickered across her face. "Then why stop for me?" she asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Wouldn't want my daughter stranded like this someday." Those words lingered in the cold air longer than either of them expected. Emily found herself studying him. The rough edges, the quiet humility, the way he spoke, with purpose but without ego. It was different, refreshing. She wasn't used to men doing good things without expecting something in return. After nearly an hour, Ethan straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "You're lucky the damage wasn't worse," he said, closing the hood. "Give me another 30 minutes, and I can patch it well enough to get you to town." Emily's eyes widened. "You're serious?" He smiled faintly. "I don't leave work half-turned." He turned back to his truck for tools, and for the first time, Emily realized she hadn't even asked his name. "Hey, what's your name?" she called out. He paused and looked over his shoulder. "Ethan Cole." "I'm Emily," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Ethan." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but kind. "Nice to meet you too, Emily, though I wish it wasn't under car trouble." She chuckled softly. "You and me both." The moon finally broke through the clouds, casting silver light over them as he worked. It felt almost cinematic. The rugged mechanic and the stranded businesswoman, bound by circumstance and separated by worlds. But as he crouched beside the engine again, Emily couldn't shake the strange feeling that fate had something else in mind, Ethan's hands worked until the small hours of the night, his movements steady despite exhaustion. Emily stood nearby, occasionally offering water or holding the flashlight when his battery dimmed. Their words became fewer, but the silence between them grew comfortable, the kind that doesn't need filling. Every so often, he'd glance up and find her watching him, her earlier sharpness replaced with quiet admiration. By the time the stars began to fade behind the first hint of dawn, Ethan finally exhaled, standing upright. "All right," he said, turning the key. The engine coughed once, then purred to life. Emily gasped, her tired eyes lighting up. "You actually did it." He smiled, relief flickering across his face. "Told you, engines don't fix themselves." She laughed again, softer this time. "You're impossible." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I get that a lot." He closed the hood gently, his voice lower now. "You're all set. Just be careful with that line until you can get it replaced properly." Emily looked at him, the rising sun painting gold across his face. She realized then that he wasn't just a mechanic. He was a man who repaired things because he believed they could always be fixed. And in some strange way, she felt like he'd fixed more than her car that night. The hum of crickets filled the still Colorado night as Ethan knelt under the dim beam of his flashlight. His tools spread neatly across the roadside gravel. Each movement was deliberate, patient, the rhythm of a man who had learned long ago that rushing never fixed anything right. Emily sat inside the car with the door open, the warm glow of the dashboard faintly illuminating her thoughtful face. The cold wind tugged gently at her hair as she watched him work, curiosity slowly replacing her earlier irritation. She had met countless people who claimed expertise, but there was something different about this man, his calm, his silence, his quiet confidence that everything could be put back together if he just tried hard enough. "You always help strangers in the middle of nowhere," she finally asked, her voice carrying over the soft clinking of metal. Ethan looked up, his expression faintly amused. Only when they looked this worried, he replied with a crooked grin. Emily laughed quietly, hugging her coat closer. "You must do this a lot then. I imagine a lot of worried people cross your path." Ethan smirked. "Not really. Most people don't stop to help anyone anymore. Guess I'm old-fashioned that way." His voice held no pride, just a simple truth. As he tightened a bolt near the cracked fuel line, Emily noticed his hands rough, scarred, and steady. Yet they handled every wire and clamp like something delicate. "You really know what you're doing," she said, trying to sound casual. Ethan chuckled softly without looking up. "It's been half my life fixing things other people give up on: engines, tractors, washing machines, you name it." He glanced at her briefly. "Cars are easy. People, not so much." The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. "I suppose you're right," she murmured. "People are far more complicated." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Emily leaned back in the driver's seat, the hum of night pressing around them. "So, what drives a guy like you to work at this hour?" she asked, her curiosity genuine now. Ethan paused for a moment, then smiled softly. "My daughter, Lily, she's 8. Smartest kid I know. Probably too smart for her old man." His expression softened in the moonlight. "She wants to be a pilot someday. I take every extra job I can to make sure she gets there." Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's really sweet." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, still crouched beside the car. "She's my world. I don't have much, but what I've got, I'll give her all of it." His voice carried a quiet strength, one that came not from ambition but from love and necessity. Emily felt a pang in her chest she couldn't quite explain. Maybe admiration, maybe something deeper. She's lucky to have you, she said softly. Ethan looked up, then, meeting her eyes briefly. "Nah," he said with a small shrug. "I'm lucky to have her." The simple truth of that line struck her more than any polished speech she'd heard in boardrooms or interviews. It wasn't rehearsed or strategic, it was real. She was so used to people talking about success and legacy, not about love and sacrifice. This man, with his grease-stained hands and old truck, suddenly felt more genuine than anyone she'd ever known. He stood up and stretched, walking back to his truck to grab a replacement part. Emily watched the way he moved, steady, unhurried, grounded. He returned with a small box of tools, crouched again, and began replacing the damaged fuel line. "You run a shop or something?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, without looking up. "Tiny place, back in Aurora. Just me, an old dog, and a coffee machine that's on its last leg. Nothing fancy, but it keeps the lights on." Emily smiled faintly. "Sounds peaceful." Ethan snorted. "Peaceful's one word for it. Lonely's another." The honesty in his tone made her blink. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He shrugged. "Sometimes, but where would I go? I got responsibilities. Besides," he said, glancing up with a small grin, "who'd fix all the cars around here if I left?" She smiled at that, though something about his words lingered in her mind. The quiet acceptance of a man who carried the weight of life without complaint. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The stars shifted above, and the highway stretched endlessly in both directions, silent except for the occasional passing truck. Emily found herself telling him things she hadn't planned to, how she'd built her company from scratch, how she'd fought for credibility in a world that rarely took young women seriously, how her work had consumed her life. Ethan listened without judgment, his focus still split between her words and the engine in front of him. "Sounds like you've come a long way," he said finally, "but you sound tired of it." Emily's eyes met his. Surprised. "How'd you guess?" He smiled faintly, "Because I've seen that look before, on folks who fix everything for everyone but forget about themselves." She went quiet after that, his words sinking in. It was uncanny how someone she'd met only hours ago could see her so clearly. Finally, just before dawn began to paint the horizon in soft pink light, Ethan wiped his hands and stood. "All right," he said, nodding toward the car. "Let's see if she's ready to run again." Emily climbed into the driver's seat, heart unexpectedly pounding. Ethan leaned over, turned the key, and after a brief sputter, the engine roared back to life. Smooth, strong, perfect. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. "You actually did it." Ethan smiled, stepping back as the headlights cut through the morning mist. "Told you, engines don't fix themselves." She stepped out, looking at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You're incredible," she said softly. He shook his head. "Just doing my job." "No," she insisted. "You went above and beyond. You could have driven past. You could have charged me a fortune. You didn't." Ethan gave a small shrug. Doesn't seem right to take advantage of someone who just needed a little help. For a moment, they stood in silence, the soft hum of the running engine between them. The sunrise glowed behind the mountains, lighting the scene in a golden hue that felt almost unreal. Emily smiled faintly. "You know," she said, "people like you are rare." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe, or maybe people just don't look close enough." He nodded toward the car. "You're all set now. Should get you to Denver without a problem." Emily hesitated before speaking again. "Can I at least pay you for your time?" Ethan shook his head immediately. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. It's Emily," she corrected. "And I insist." He grinned. "Well, if you really want to pay me back, tell me this story doesn't make me sound like a crazy mechanic chasing midnight adventures." She laughed, genuinely this time, and he joined her, the sound carrying over the empty road like music. As she climbed back into her car, she turned to him once more. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He nodded. "Drive safe, Emily." Their eyes met, brief, but electric. Then she shifted into gear and drove off toward the sunrise, glancing once in the mirror to see him standing there beside his old pickup, framed by dawn. She didn't know his last name, his address, or if she'd ever see him again. But as the miles rolled beneath her tires, one thought echoed in her mind. He wasn't just fixing engines, he was fixing people, one night at a time. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, brushing soft gold against the jagged silhouettes of the Rockies. The highway, which only hours ago had been cloaked in darkness, now shimmered faintly with the glow of morning. Ethan Cole stood beside his old truck, his breath visible in the chill air, the lingering hum of the repaired Mercedes still echoing faintly in his ears. Emily Hart leaned against her car, the glow of sunrise reflecting off its polished surface, watching him quietly. There was something grounding about his presence, unpolished, unhurried, and honest in a way few people ever were in her world. "How much do I owe you?" she finally asked, her voice breaking the calm silence. Ethan smiled faintly, rubbing the grease from his palms with an old rag. "Nothing," he said simply, "just glad you're safe." His tone carried no hint of pretense or expectation. Emily tilted her head, frowning. "You worked all night, Ethan. You deserve something." He glanced toward the pale pink sky, then back at her, the corners of his eyes creasing with warmth. "Some things aren't about money, ma'am." The simplicity of the answer struck her like a soft blow because in her world, everything was about money. Every hour billed, every deal signed, every second of time bought or sold for profit. Yet here stood a man who'd spent the night fixing a stranger's car and asked for nothing but a thank you. "You're different," she said after a moment. Ethan chuckled lightly. "That what people tell you when they can't figure you out." She smiled for the first time that night. "Maybe." Ethan closed his toolbox and set it into the bed of his pickup, the metallic clank echoing through the still morning. "You should get going," he said, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "Sun's up, and it's a long drive back to Denver." Emily hesitated. "Right? I almost forgot where I was even headed." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I guess I'll remember this highway forever." He grinned, leaning casually against his truck. "Most people don't remember the roads that break them down, just the people who help them get moving again." She looked at him, studying his face as if memorizing it, the lines carved by long days, the quiet kindness in his eyes, the fatigue of a man who carried life on his shoulders and never complained. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time. "Really?" He nodded once. "Just doing what I can." The wind picked up slightly, lifting a few strands of her hair. "You ever get tired of doing what you can?" she asked, almost as if she were speaking to herself. Ethan smiled faintly, looking toward the sunrise. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then, I remember my little girl's waiting for me to come home. She thinks her dad's a superhero, and I ain't ready to prove her wrong yet." That made Emily laugh, not the polite kind she gave in boardrooms, but a genuine, surprised laugh that warmed the morning air. "You're something else, Ethan Cole," he shrugged modestly. "Just a mechanic, ma'am." "It's Emily," she corrected. "No more, ma'am." He nodded, his smile growing. "Emily." Then, they stood there in the fading chill, watching the light climb over the mountains. It felt like one of those moments that didn't belong to time, where two people from opposite worlds collided, and for a fleeting instant, everything felt simple and true. Emily turned to open her car door, but hesitated again. "You ever think about working somewhere bigger?" she asked suddenly. Ethan looked up, curious. "Like where?" She hesitated, as if she wasn't ready to reveal the thought behind the question. "Just somewhere that would appreciate what you can do." He shrugged. "I've worked for big companies before. They see folks like me as replaceable parts, not people. I'd rather stay small and free," she nodded, understanding more than she expected. "Freedom's expensive though." He smiled. "Yeah, but so is regret." Emily bit her lip, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. "Take this, just in case you ever change your mind," she said, handing it to him. Ethan took it politely but didn't look at it right away. "I'll keep it safe," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "You better," as she slid into the driver's seat. Ethan finally glanced at the card. The logo on it was sleek and unmistakable. Hart Aerotech Industries. His brow furrowed slightly. "Aviation?" he asked, looking up. She grinned, her hand on the steering wheel. "Something like that." He nodded slowly, not pressing further. "Take care of that girl of yours," Emily said through the open window. "I will," he replied, "and you try not to break down on highways anymore." She laughed again. "No promises." With that, she shifted the car into gear. The engine, the same one he'd rebuilt from the inside out, purred smoothly, alive and perfect. As the Mercedes rolled away down the empty stretch of road, Ethan stood there for a while, watching the trail of dust fade into the golden light. He felt oddly lighter, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the satisfaction of a job well done. Maybe it was the reminder that kindness still had power, even when no one was watching. He finally climbed into his truck, glancing at the business card again before tucking it into the sun visor. "Emily Hart," he murmured, testing the name aloud. It sounded familiar. Maybe he'd seen it on a magazine cover once, or a billboard downtown. But before the thought could settle, his phone buzzed. A message from Lily's babysitter. "She's awake and wants pancakes." Ethan smiled to himself. "On my way, kiddo." As his truck rumbled back onto the road, the morning sun bathed the world in warmth. Behind him, miles away, Emily Hart drove toward her company headquarters in downtown Denver. She kept glancing at the clock on her dashboard, replaying the night in her mind, the way his voice had steadied when he talked about his daughter, the way his hands moved with purpose, the humility that felt almost extinct in her world. She'd met engineers, investors, executives, but never anyone quite like Ethan Cole. By the time she reached her office parking lot, the city was already alive with noise. Her assistant rushed to her car, carrying documents and phone updates, but Emily barely heard a word. She was thinking about the man who refused payment, the one who fixed her engine without asking who she was, a man who didn't see her as a CEO, but just another person stranded on the side of the road. Before heading inside, she pulled her phone out and searched her company's employment records. Her smile widened slightly. "Let's see if Mr. Cole ever needs a change of scenery," she whispered. Back on the outskirts of town, Ethan drove past his daughter's school, the morning sun glinting off his windshield. He didn't know that the woman he'd helped was the very CEO of the company he'd always dreamed of working for. A company that designed aircraft engines so advanced, he'd studied them in his free time for years. To him, she was just Emily, kind, grateful, and maybe a little lost in her own way. He couldn't have guessed that this simple act of kindness, one long, sleepless night on an empty highway, was about to change everything he thought he knew about fate, work, and love. And somewhere in the city skyline, Emily Hart smiled at her reflection in her office window, the sunrise spilling behind her, and whispered softly to herself, "We'll meet again, Ethan, I'm sure of it." 2 weeks later, the Colorado morning air carried that crisp, hopeful chill of early winter, the kind that made your breath visible and your nerves sharper. Ethan Cole sat on a bench outside Horizon Motors, Denver's gleaming glass and steel automotive headquarters, his calloused hands gripping a folded resume. He'd woken up before dawn, ironed his only collared shirt, and driven the 30 miles from his small apartment, running on coffee and cautious optimism. This wasn't just any interview, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Horizon Motors was the nation's leading innovator in electric engines and hybrid technologies, the kind of company Ethan had once dreamed of working for, back when his garage was still running. Back before life had forced him to trade his passion for practicality. His stomach twisted with nervous energy as he watched sharply dressed professionals stride through the rotating doors, their ID badges gleaming under the morning sun. He felt out of place, a man from another world, trying to find a way back in. The receptionist, a friendly young man with a headset, smiled as Ethan approached the desk. "Mr. Cole, right on time. Please have a seat, Ms. Hart, we'll see you shortly. Ethan froze for a moment, the name flickering in his mind like a sudden spark. Hart, could it be? No, it couldn't. The Emily he met that night had said she was in aviation or something like that. This was Horizon Motors. Still, his pulse quickened slightly as he took a seat in the waiting area, his gaze flicking to the sleek company logo across the wall. The hum of electric cars being tested echoed faintly through the glass partition. He tried to calm his mind. Focus, Ethan. You've rebuilt engines blindfolded. You can handle a few questions. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. Moments later, the office door swung open, and in walked Emily Hart, poised, radiant, and wearing a charcoal gray blazer that made her presence command the entire room. Her hair was neatly tied back, but her smile was unmistakable, warm and knowing, just like the one she'd given him at sunrise 2 weeks ago. Ethan stood, speechless. His eyes widened as the truth crashed into him. You're the CEO, he said, disbelief coloring every word. Emily smiled, stepping closer. Good morning, Mr. Cole, she said smoothly. I believe you've already fixed one of our engines. The words hit him like a memory. The night highway, the cold air, the way she'd said thank you. He blinked, trying to find his footing. Wait, Horizon Motors. You, she nodded, her expression softening. Technically, I'm the CEO of Horizon Hart Industries. Horizon merged with my company last year. So yes, you could say this is my second engine you'll be working on. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I'll try not to make you break down this time. Emily laughed, her eyes sparkling. You couldn't if you tried. They sat across from each other, in her glass-walled office, sunlight spilling across the polished desk. Ethan handed over his resume, though she didn't seem particularly interested in the papers. I've already read your file, she said. But more importantly, I've seen your work firsthand. He shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, that night, I didn't even know who you were. Exactly, she interrupted softly. You helped without knowing, without asking, without expecting. That's the kind of heart I want leading my innovation lab. Ethan blinked. Innovation lab. Emily nodded, leaning forward slightly. We're building a new team. We want to design engines that last, ones that can survive harsh conditions, adapt to real-world needs. I need someone who doesn't just understand machines, but understands people. Someone who sees what's broken and fixes it, not for credit, but because it's the right thing to do. He sat there, trying to process her words. It almost didn't feel real. He'd spent years scraping by, cleaning floors, repairing junkers, keeping his head down. Now, this woman, this powerful, brilliant CEO, was offering him a seat at a table he'd never thought he'd even be allowed to stand near. Ms. Hart, he said quietly, I'm honored, but I don't have a fancy degree or an engineering license anymore. I'm just a mechanic. Emily smiled, the corners of her eyes softening. You're not just anything, Ethan. You rebuilt a German twin-turbo engine from scratch. In the dark, using a flashlight and borrowed tools. That's not luck. That's brilliance. He looked down, humbled. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she replied gently. Join me. There was a pause, one of those rare moments where silence carried more meaning than any words could. Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. And if I mess up, he asked. Then you fix it, she said with a grin. That's what you do, isn't it? Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. Guess so. He extended his hand, his calloused fingers brushing hers as they shook the same handshake they'd shared that morning on the highway. But this time, it meant something bigger. This time, it wasn't a goodbye, it was the start of something new. As they stood, Emily looked at him thoughtfully. You know, she said, that night, when my car broke down, I thought I was being punished. I'd just come from a conference where everyone was talking about profits and projections, and I felt completely empty. Then you showed up out of nowhere, this quiet mechanic who worked all night without asking for a thing. You reminded me why I started this company in the first place. To build something that lasts. Something that matters. Ethan's voice softened. Sometimes, life breaks us just enough to make room for better parts. She smiled, spoken like a true engineer. As he turned to leave, Emily stopped him at the door. Ethan. He glanced back. Yeah. She hesitated, then smiled with a spark of humor in her eyes. Guess that broken engine wasn't the only thing you fixed. For a moment, the world seemed to still. He smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. Glad I could help, he said quietly. Later that evening, Ethan drove home in his old pickup, the sunset glowing behind him. On the passenger seat lay a Horizon Motors badge, his name freshly printed beneath the title Lead Technical Advisor. He ran his thumb over it, shaking his head in disbelief. Lily would be so proud. When he pulled into his driveway, his daughter came running out, waving a crayon drawing of a car with wings. Daddy, look, it flies. Ethan laughed, scooping her up. Maybe one day, kiddo. Far across the city, Emily Hart stood by her office window, watching the same sunset fade over Denver's skyline. She thought about the mechanic who'd appeared like a miracle on the side of the road, and how sometimes fate doesn't arrive in boardrooms, it shows up in grease-stained hands and kind eyes. As night settled, she sent one final email before closing her laptop. To Ethan Cole, subject, Welcome to the team message. The road that breaks you might just lead you where you're meant to be. Emily. Ethan read the message hours later, smiling quietly to himself. He looked out the window at the night sky and whispered, "Guess engines aren't the only things worth rebuilding." And somewhere in the city, two hearts, one forged in steel, the other in sincerity, had found their way into the same rhythm, proving once again that sometimes a simple act of kindness can ignite the engine of destiny itself.